as we begin the Mishnah of Nedarim, we're going to need a couple of verses, a couple of biblical verses. And these are pretty well known. The first comes from the very, very beginning of the parasha of Matot. So one of the closing sedras of the book of Bamidbar, of Numbers. Ishki do neder ladonai or hishava shavua lesor isar al nafsho lo yachel devaro kechol hayotze mipiv yaseh. If someone vows a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind his soul with a bond, lesor isar al nafsho, an oath is something that binds your soul. Lo yachel devaro, he shall not break his word. So it's possible to make a vow or an oath, and we'll see in a minute what vows and oaths are. And it's impossible, we can't, if we make a vow, we can't break our word. That's the first pasuk. And by the way, this will cause the rabbi some disturbance. We'll see right at the beginning of the Mishnah that taking a vow is seen as a negative thing, an evil thing to do. I suppose because the consequences of breaking it are very, very serious. It's forbidden to break it. So we'll see at the beginning of the Mishnah that it's seen as a negative, a dangerous thing to do. And we'll see at the end of the tractate that the tractate gets into questions as to how people can get released from their vows. Because we need some way out. We need some way out. So the tractate will begin by defining different kinds of vows, and it will end by defining how we get out of these vows. That is more or less the structure of the tractate in Nedarim. There's one more verse that we need from the end of Vayikra, from the end of Leviticus. And this doesn't refer to a neder or a shavua, but to a cherem. A cherem is some kind of devoted thing. I mean, in Tanakh, property which was cherem would be basically sacrificed or destroyed. But in terms of Vayikra, it's dedicated to the Beit Mikdash. In other words, it's given over to the Beit Mikdash. Kol cherem asher yachrim ish ladonai mikol asher lo me'adam u'behema u'misteh uzato lo yimacher v'lo yigael kol cherem kodesh kodashim hu l'Hashem. So something that's devoted, something that's cherem, can't be sold or redeemed. In most other places, if you have Maser Sheni, you can redeem it for money. You can carry the money to Jerusalem. But the cherem can't be sold or redeemed. It's completely locked up. And we'll touch on this in just a minute. But before we touch on it, we just need to just understand two different categories of vows. There's a neder, and we learned in the verse in Bamidbar, in Numbers, there's a neder which prohibits an object from a person. So in other words, maybe this loaf of bread is prohibited to me. I can't eat that loaf of bread. And there's a shavua, which prohibits a person from taking an action. In other words, I can't eat that bread. And we're going to learn about the distinction between shavua and neder, but we'll see that a neder is always associated with an object. It prohibits the object from the person, whereas a shavua is going to prohibit a person from an action. So with that in mind, we're going to start very gently, very, very gentle on the beginning of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is going to talk about nicknames. It seems as if in the time of the Mishnah, people didn't use, if you like, the full, they didn't express they didn't express themselves fully. And they seem to use nicknames for things. We'll see in the second Mishnah some of these nicknames. But the Mishnah is going to begin just by establishing that nicknames are valid. Kol kinuyei nedarim ki nedarim. All nicknames for vows are like vows. And by the way, when we learn the next chapter of the order of Nashim, which is the tractate of Nazir, we'll see that the tractate of Nazir begins in exactly the same way. And of course, a Nazir, someone who prohibits himself from cutting his hair or drinking wine, well, that's really a specialized kind of oath. In some ways, the tractates of Nazir and of Nedarim go together, just like the tractate of Shabbat and Eruvin go together. And very interestingly, they start in the same way. They both start Kol Kinuyeh. So Kol Kinuyeh Nedarim ki Nedarim. All nicknames for vows are like vows. For Charamim, Charamim, here's the Cherem coming back. For Charamim are like Charamim. Ushvot ki Shvot, for oaths like oaths. Unazirut ki Nazirut, and for Naziriteness like Naziriteness. So already we're tying together, right? We're tying together already these two tractates, not just because they start in the same way, but because already at the beginning of Nedarim, we're already mentioning the Nazir. And we'll see, we'll actually come, we're going to rotate around the Nazir in a few different directions. So someone says to his friend, Ha'omer l'chavero. Now we'll just look at a few examples now. Ha'omer l'chavero, mudar ani mimach, mufrash ani mimach, murchat ani mimach, this is sheni, but it's she'ani. She'ani ochela, she'ani to'emla asur. So he can use various formulations. I'm forbidden to you. I'm separated from you. I'm distanced from you. That I should eat from you. He's prohibited. These are all different formulations. These are all different formulations of vows or oaths. If he says, I'm kind of excommunicated from you, or I'm banned from you. Rabbi Akiva was inclined to rule stringently, but it already seems like this is not quite the right language. If he says, Nidrei Risha'im, Nadar ban Nazir, as the vows of the wicked. This seems to refer to someone who's seen a Nazir walking down the road, and he makes an expression, like the vows of the wicked. He's referring to the Nazir here, actually. But the vow is accepted. Penidrei ksherin, as the vows of those who are kosher. Now, a Nazir, of course, the wicked refers to the Nazir, and we know, of course, Nazirim have made an oath, right? They made an oath to be a Nazir. Now, normal people don't make oaths. People who are kosher don't make oaths. So if you say, kinidrei kasherim, lo amar klum, you haven't actually said anything. It's not a valid euphemism for an oath, because kosher people actually don't make oaths. Evil people make oaths. You can see already that the Mishnah is setting out its terminology, but it's also giving you the views of the rabbis about, it's telling you what the rabbis think about oaths, which is that they really don't like them. If you say Knid Butam, Nadar Nazir Korban, if you say as their free will offerings, then you have actually vowed in respect to being a Nazir or maybe a sacrifice, because people do actually bring free will offerings. So, and this is the kind of thing you could make a vow about. So the standard formulation of the vow would be, look, this loaf of bread is for me like, for example, a korban. Now, I can't eat the korban. The korban is dedicated to God. It's got to go to the temple. So if the loaf of bread is like a korban, it's forbidden to me to eat. That's the formulation of the vow. So we say, it's like a korban, i.e., I can't eat it. I can't take possession of it. And it seems that in the time of the Mishnah, they didn't use the word korban. whether they, because they didn't like to pronounce that word, or because of slang, I'm not sure, and the commentators aren't very sure, but it is clear that there were very many nicknames for these kinds of vows. And indeed, the Mishnah began, Kol Kinuye Nedarim Ki Nedarim. All the nicknames for Nedarim are like Nedarim, and for Haramim are like Haramim. And so now we're going to see some of these nicknames. So let's have a look at the second Mishnah. Then we'll close here, because this is enough introductory material just to get us going. Omer, Kuna, Kunas. Hare elu kinuyim lekorban. If you say konam or kunach or kunas, these are nicknames for korban. That is to say, this loaf of bread will be for me like a korban, like a sacrifice. And as the Mishnah tells us, we'll see that the language of the neder is very, very abbreviated, but we're going to use a nickname. Let's keep going. Perek. Hare elu kinuyim lachem. So perek or herek, these are substitutes for, or nicknames for herek. Nazik, nazia, hazia. Hare elu kinuyim li nazirut. So nazik, nazia, and pasir, these are substitutes for Nazirite vows. And then shvuta, shvuka. Now, this, of course, we actually have shvuta and shvuka. We have, of course, in the Kol Nidrei prayer. Yeah, shvuta and shvuka. Shvuka nadar b'mohen hare elu kinuyim lishvua. So shvuta, shvuka, or someone who vows with the word mohen, nadar b'mohen hare elu kinuyim lishvua. These are substitutes for Shua. Okay, so that's the introduction to Nedarim. As we learn the subsequent Mishnah, we'll learn lots of different formulations for these vows, and we'll see whether they apply or not. So most of the first 2 to 3 chapters of the Mishnah is about different formulations of vows and how they apply or not. But we are going to use these concepts, the Nazir, the Cherem, the Shavua, the Korban, and we're going to use the nicknames. That is how we're going to establish essentially the basic verbal framework of the Nedarim before we then analyze exactly what they apply to, and then finally at the end of the tractate, before we learn how we get out of them.